he considered Dante also a criminal like him, a sinner like him, and he thought that Dante was also sent to the inferno like him. And this is all what we come to find. The epigraph for the poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrow. And I told you in the Portrait of a Lady also there is an epigraph, and the epigraph is taken from Marlowe's play Jew of Malta. And in the poem Girondine, we come to find that there has been an epigraph taken from Shakespeare's play Measure for Measure. Thou hast nor youth nor age, and the lines very interestingly. Thou hast nor youth nor age, but as it were an after dinner sleep, dreaming of both. So thou hast nor youth nor age, and it is the condition of the elderly man. He is not to be called a young man or a very old man, but as it were an after dinner sleep. And actually youth and old age is just a kind of sleep, is just a kind of dream in a dinner sleep, dreaming of both. So the old man is found dreaming of his youth and dreaming of his old age. And this is the epigraph taken from Shakespeare's play Measure for Measure. And after all, we come to find the next important modernistic poem written by him. And here we come to find a slightly changed title as Spies of Immortality. And this poem was published by Virginia Woolf and Leonard Woolf through their press called Hogarth Press. And Eliot praises the Jacobean masters like Webster and Donne. And it is in this poem we come to find T.S.ELIOT praising both Webster and John Donne. And Webster is referred to in the poem as a playwright who saw the skull beneath the skin. And it's a very popular opinion made by T.S.ELIOT on Webster. Webster was a great playwright during the Jacobean. He started from the Elizabethan and continued in Jacobean also. Webster producing his two great tragedies, The Duchess of Malfi and The White Devil. And the tragedy presented by him in both the plays seemed to be so highly effective and successful. The tragedy presented by him had full details. He knew how to strike, and he found the skull beneath the skin, and he could easily strike the skull and present the tragedy. And this has been a praise made by him on Webster, and he also praises John Donne. And we know that it was T.S.ELIOT who revived the metaphysical poems. Professor Grierson brought out a collection of the metaphysical poems in 1912. And Eliot became inspired by the poems. And he also produced collections of poems written by the metaphysicals. And produced an essay also on the metaphysical poets. So the beginning can be found in his poem, Spies of Immortality. And the poem is interestingly published by Virginia Woolf. And the poem praises the Jacobean masters like Webster and Donne. And this was one poem produced by him in 1920. And in the same year, he came out with his collection of essays called The Sacred Woods. And it has got a subtitle also, Essays on Poetry and Criticism. And there are 20 essays included in The Sacred Woods. And the popular essays are The Tradition and Individual Challenge, Hamlet and His Problems, Swinburne as a Critic, Swinburne as a Poet, and there were essays on Dante and Blake, William Blake and Dante, So he included the essays of Dante, Blake, Sinbone, Philip Massinger, and there are many critical essays. Yeah? The total number of essays were 20. 20 essays were included in this collection, and it was brought out by him in 1920. So in 1922, he came out with his poem, The Wasteland. And in fact, to publish the poem, he started a magazine also. Eliot also started a magazine called The Criterion. It was a magazine started by Eliot in 1922, and it continued to produce the issues until 1939, and then it turned to become Faber and Faber. And Eliot was appointed as the director of Faber and Faber during all his life, and he continued to remain as the director of the great publishing house, Faber and Faber. Actually, the magazine was started by Eliot under the name Criterion in 1922, and he started the magazine with the intention of bringing out his poem, The Wasteland. And The Wasteland was published in the poem, The Criterion. And in the same year, the poem was published in an American magazine called The Dial. The Dial was a magazine of the American Transcendentals, like Emerson and Thoreau. And The Dial also published the poem in the same year. And in the next year, in 1923, Virginia Woolf and Leonard Woolf brought out the poem through their press, Hogarth. And The Wasteland seems to be one of the groundbreaking poems in the canon of T.S.ELIOT. And I told you that this is the poem that inaugurated the modern age. Actually, there was another collection of poems to be published in the same year by William Carlos Williams. William Carlos Williams wanted to publish a collection of his poems entitled Spring and All. But his publication took place only after The Wasteland. And therefore the credit went to T.S.ELIOT for inaugurating the modern age. If the collection of Carlos Williams was published before The Wasteland, Carlos Williams might have been regarded as the inaugurator, but unfortunately he could bring out his poems only after the publication of The Wasteland. And the collection of William Carlos Williams is entitled Spring and All. And there is a very popular poem, Red Veal Barrow, included in the collection. And I told you, the poem is dedicated to Ezra Pound. And there has been a dedication to Ezra Pound, hailing him as the better craftsman. The dedication is to Ezra Pound, Il Miglior Fabbro. Il Miglior Fabbro. So the Latin terms, Il Miglior Fabbro, means better craftsman. And the poem is dedicated to Ezra Pound, hailing him as the better craftsman. And actually the idea of The Wasteland came to Eliot through Ezra Pound. It was Pound who asked Eliot to write a poem about the spectacle of Europe committing suicide. It was Ezra Pound who wanted T.S.ELIOT to produce a poem on the spectacle of Europe committing suicide. And he opined that, he said that the people in Europe are found ready to commit suicide. The spectacle of the people committing suicide must be a good subject for a poem. And Eliot produced the poem and presented the poem to Ezra Pound. And when it was presented, there were about 1,000 lines in the poem. And Ezra Pound was an imagist. In fact, he cut short the poem. In imagery, in the use of imagism, we come to find that there are no details required. So the repetition of adjective will be cut short or abandoned in imagist poem. And he reduced the poem into 434 lines. And it is popularly said that, so he had conducted a Caesarean operation of the sprawling poem. So he had conducted a Caesarean operation, a virtual Caesarean operation on the sprawling poem, and made it into a poem of 434 lines. Actually, the poem expresses the disillusionment of a generation. So it can be said as the poem expressing the disillusionment of a generation. And Eliot himself described it as a rhythmical grumbling. The poem has been described by Eliot as rhythmical grumbling. And the poem actually deals with the ugliness, the emptiness, and the aimlessness of the modern world. The ugliness, the emptiness, and the aimlessness of the modern world. And the structure of the poem is also very unconventional. And Eliot presents the post-war world using a heap of broken images. We come to find Eliot using a number of broken images to present the post-war world and its emptiness and ugliness, its aimlessness. And the poem is rich in allusion and literary borrowings, and there are a lot of intertextual references. Almost every line in the poem has got some reference to some other piece of writing. Almost every line in the poem has got some intertextual connection. And there are only 434 lines, but Eliot, the poem has been described by Ezra Pound as the longest poem in English. And there are a few other interesting things connected with the poem. Eliot actually wanted the title of the poem, The Wasteland, to be produced in 3 words with the definite article the. The wasteland in 3 words. He wanted Ezra Pound to produce the title in 3 words. Actually, there was another poem written by a man named Madison J. Cowell. There was a writer named Madison J. Cowell who produced a poem called Wasteland, produced as a single word. Wasteland. There is no definite article. And it was published in 1913. And Eliot actually borrowed the title from Madison J. Cowell. And there is also another interesting thing about the title of the poem. Formerly, Eliot wanted to name the poem as He Do the Police in Different Voices. It's very interesting. He wanted the poem to be entitled as He Do the Police in Different Voices. He Do the Police in Different Voices. And this line has been taken from Charles Dickens's novel, Our Mutual Friend. So it is referred to Our Mutual Friend. That he do the police and has been doing lot of good things, but done in different voices. He do the police in different voices. And we come to find the protagonist of The Wasteland also finding many number of things, doing many number of things, like the police in different voices. So the title seemed to be significant, but he avoided the title. He Do the Police in Different Voices was taken from Charles Dickens's novel, Our Mutual Friend. But he changed the title into The Wasteland in 3 words. And Eliot has also said that, in fact, to understand the poem properly, there must be 2 books read by us. We must have an idea of 2 books, in fact, to understand the poem The Wasteland. For a proper understanding of the poem, two books are often referred to by Eliot. And one book is written by Sir James Fraser, and it is entitled The Golden Bough. It's a very popular book. A collection of legends and stories involving fertility gods and vegetation rituals. And the book by Fraser, James Fraser, Sir James Fraser, entitled The Golden Bough, was produced in the year 1890. Before The Wasteland, it was published in 1890. And the collection contained stories of fertility gods and vegetation rituals. And very interestingly, in this book, there is the story of Mamankam at Tirunavaya in Kerala, in India. So there has been a story of Mamankam. So an annual feast found in the northern Malabar. That is also described in the book of James Fraser. And Eliot studied Indian mythology and philosophy as he was there at the Harvard University under J. Chutes. And he also read the book of James Fraser called The Golden Bough, which included many stories of fertility gods and vegetation rituals all over the world, including a few mythical stories taken from India also, like the Mamanka that take place in Tirunavaya at Kerala. And the place is called Tirunavaya in Malabar. And the next book prescribed by T.S.ELIOT is Jessie Weston's. Jessie L. Weston's book entitled From Ritual to Romance. From Ritual to Romance was published by Miss Jessie L. Weston in 1920. Eliot's poem The Wasteland came out in 1922, and Jessie L. Weston's book From Ritual to Romance was published in 1920. And Eliot might have read the book very well. In fact, he had taken many images and symbols from the book of Jessie Weston. And the book chiefly deals with the Holy Grail legends. And the Holy Grail legend has been used by T.S.ELIOT in his poem The Wasteland. The Holy Grail was actually the cup used by Jesus Christ during his Last Supper. And it's a symbol of perfection. And it is believed that the knights of the Round Table in Arthur's time, the Arthurian knights, the knights attached with King Arthur, were in the quest for the Holy Grail. And it is called the quest motif. So there are various references to Arthurian legends also found in the poem. And then we come to find the protagonist of the poem. Interestingly, the protagonist is Theseus. And there are multiple protagonists in the poem Wastelands. In the Wasteland, we come to find that there are 5 sections. Burial of the dead, a game of chess, the fire ceremony, death by water, and what the thunder said are the 5 episodes included in the Wastelands. Burial of the dead, and we have to read the titles so repeatedly so that we can remember, and at the same time so we can remember the episodes by remembering the incidents described in each episode. Interestingly, there are 5 episodes included in the Wasteland, and in the 5 episodes we come to find multiple protagonists. So in Stream of Consciousness we find multiple protagonists, and this poem is written in the modernistic strain, imitating the avant-garde technique, the Stream of Consciousness technique, the psychological technique, and we come to find multiple protagonists. And once UGC and Kerala PSC also asked a question confusing the students and identify the chief protagonist in the poem The Wasteland, and the names of Madame Sosostris was also in the Hyacinth girl and Sweeney, and these are the protagonists here. Tiresias is also a protagonist, but the name of Tiresias was not included in the options. And in Kerala PSC, so they said that it was Madame Sosostris to be considered as the protagonist. And then the confusion came. And Eliot himself said that the protagonist of his poem is Tiresias. And Tiresias is found introduced only in the fire ceremony. And we don't come to find Tiresias in the first episode or in the other episodes other than fire ceremony. And this was also one question asked by UGC once. The protagonist Tiresias is introduced in which part of the poem? So he is introduced in the fire ceremony, in the longest episode. Fire ceremony is the longest episode. And it is in fire ceremony Tiresias has been introduced. And very interestingly, Eliot maintained that Tiresias actually represents the human consciousness. And he is considered by Eliot as the speaker of the poem. And in Greek mythology, Tiresias is presented as a blind prophet, and we find Tiresias in Greek dramas also. In Oedipus Rex, we find Tiresias. Tiresias has been a stock character in the Greek dramas, and he is a person who knows everything and is a blind philosopher. And he has been blessed with eternal life, and he has been given eternal life. He is immortal. And there are many interesting things taking place in his life. For 7 years, he had been a woman because of a curse. Once, as Tiresias was passing the forest, he found 2 snakes mating. And he tried to separate them by throwing a stone. And he was cursed to become a woman. And he continued to remain as a woman for 7 years. And again, as he was passing the forest, he found 2 snakes mating. And he had thrown a stone on them, and they cursed him to become